this planet's empty. I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Yes, it is Friday, March 1st. We are into March. Friday, March 1st, 2024. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can also support the show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress for all the details. And you can also help out the show by heading to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. Yes, indeed. And if you're our awesome podcast listeners, hey, we need you too. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen on and leave a comment to let other folks know why you like the show. Little things like this can help other folks find the show. Ooh, boy, oh boy. What do we got on today's show? Well, a whole bunch today. We're going to get into a whole bunch. So more than 110. I think the count is 112 or 113. Hungry and desperate Palestinians were killed early Thursday morning trying to get much-needed food and medical aid. Some of the dead were gunned down by Israeli troops. Others were run over by the aid trucks attempting to flee the scene. It was an absolutely devastating morning, and this is the cost of Israeli policy. But we shall see. In a huge announcement, Starbucks officially announced that it will no longer work to oppose unionization efforts by its employees. Now that nearly 400 Starbucks stores voted to unionize and founder and former CEO Howard Shultz is no longer running the show, it seems that Starbucks Workers United will now be heading to contract negotiations in good faith. Now look, we shall see, but this is a big step forward. In a joint statement, Starbucks and Workers United said they will, quote, begin discussions on a foundational framework designed to achieve collective bargaining agreements for representative stores and partners. Now, I saw an interview with Michelle Eisen, who's was ahead of the first unionization effort up in Buffalo for the first unionized Starbucks store, and she was on the Majority Report yesterday or Wednesday, talking about how big of a deal this is, and that she's actually thinks they're serious about it, that they've kind of turned a new leaf, so to speak. They're going to try to kind of go do this. Now, this is just going to be absolutely huge for the entire sector for unionization efforts across the country. Speaking of strikes, thousands of academic workers are on strike at York University in Toronto. On Thursday, members of other unions across Ontario joined the picket lines in support of the striking brothers and sisters. Last week, the Penridge School District, yay, the first of the nation to hire Hillsdale-inspired Vermilion Education to rewrite their social studies curriculum and English curriculum through a Christian nationalist lens. Yeah, those folks. Well, new school board, new leaf. Seems we were talking about turning over new leaves. Well, they officially scrapped the Hillsdale proposed curriculum. Yes, it was a campaign promise, and they delivered big time. Officially canceling all of the previous board's attempts to shove Christian nationalist curriculum down our throats. I could almost hear the tears of Jordan Blomgren in the night. An Illinois court has kicked Trump off this year's Republican primary ballot, all but assuring another round of Supreme Court decisions. The order has been put on hold pending appeal. Early voting has already begun in the state. Just my 2 cents. My guess is that you're going to see an increase of numbers of Republicans getting out to vote now that this has happened. Just a hunch. Mitch McConnell announced that he's retiring for the Senate leadership after this year's election. See ya, turtle. Well, let the all-out Senate Republican civil war commence. It is going to be a show in the Senate from Republicans, that's for sure. Speaking of primaries coming up, well, Uncommitted is set to win 2 delegates from Michigan as a protest over Biden's unwillingness to stop the Israeli government's genocidal war in Gaza. Just continues. In the Michigan primary, yes, it's almost 17% of the Democratic primary voters voted uncommitted, right? And overtly voting uncommitted on the grounds of to protest Biden's support of the Israeli genocidal war in Gaza. Now, this is going to be a factor, that's for sure. And it's not just Michigan, right? You think that's a fluke? Well, hold on. Washington State, like the state of Washington, Washington State's largest labor union, the United Food and Commercial Workers, has endorsed uncommitted in this year's Democratic primary. Yeah, so one way or another, the Biden administration is no longer going to be able to kind of brush off these people as a few, few people on the margins, people we really don't need, but this is actually pretty significant. And in one of the most brazen statements of late from Big Oil, Exxon scolded the world in a recent interview with Fortune magazine, saying that Exxon and other fossil fuel companies are not to blame for the climate crisis. Nope, not at all. Who is? Everyone else but them, it appears. Yes, indeed. Exxon CEO Darren Woods told the magazine, quote, "The world waited too long," unquote, "to develop green technologies, and that people who are generating the emissions need to be aware and pay the price." And who are these people? You guessed it, you and me. That's right. We're to blame for the climate crisis because we just didn't get off our butts, right? And, build new green technologies. Never mind. Billions of dollars over the years have been put into climate denial institutes being supported by Exxon and other big oil companies. Millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying to prevent any kind of climate action. Hundreds of millions of dollars of lobbying going into resisting any subsidies for green technologies while making sure that the subsidies for big oil and fossil fuel companies continued. I read the first version of this. I said, okay, wait. I can't even believe this guy is saying this. And after, reading like the third article about this, I'm like, this is unbelievable. They just tipped their hand, basically, and showed us this is how we're going forward, right? So much for kind of like partners in the transition. No. They are going to make sure that they are not going to have to pay for the mess that they so strongly fought for. And that is going to be put on our backs. If there is not a better sign that we need to basically rip the subsidies away from big oil and basically ensure that a huge percentages of their profits go into climate mitigation that they help to produce. That's one of these things that's crazy. And what do they mean by pay the price? Well, yeah, we're going to have to fork up the money to actually, build out the new infrastructure. But let's talk about what some of that price list looks like. When they say pay the price, they're talking about things like this, I bet, in the back of their brains. They know this is what they're talking about. So, for example, right now, a treacherous blizzard is bearing down on the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California. The storm is expected to dump upwards of 10 feet of snow, if not more, and winds have already reached 145 miles an hour at their peaks. Already, right? This is following, right, the huge atmospheric river that just basically drowns Southern California. Right? And all the climate scientists say, yep, this is a direct result. This is what happens when you put this much more moisture in the atmosphere. Oh, what? So now you're sitting there, California was, complaining about their droughts and everything. Right? We're complaining about wildfires. So this is actually a solution. Oh, yeah, well, tell that to Texas. Yeah, that's right. The Smokehouse Creek fire in Texas has now become the second largest wildfire in U.S. history, burning out of control more than 1 million acres of land just north of Amarillo. That's an area this larger than the entire state of Rhode Island, okay? So that's what we're talking about, right? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about saying, oh, yeah, the snow is actually good for the drought. Oh, well, what about what's happened in Texas? Oh, never mind, Texas, this is a fluke. This is just crazy. And who is supporting those narratives? Oh, maybe people like Darren Woods from Exxon. And this is what it means to have to pay the price. And these folks are just washing their hands of it. It's absolutely infuriating. Well, it's good to know that there's at least a few people out there that got a chunk of change that are going to do something positive with it. Yes, a former professor at Albert Einstein College in New York, right, announced to all the students in front of her, she announced a $1 billion donation to the Albert Einstein College to cover all future medical school tuition. That's right. All future. Ruth Gottesman said, like, her donation was the largest ever made to an educational institution in the United States. I just want to close this out because this is great. I was gonna read. This is from what am I reading from? This is from the Statements of Democracy Now. They talked about this in Democracy Now, but here it is. The United States. Okay, she's a 93-year-old woman, and she studied learning disabilities and created an adult literacy program. She was married to a Wall Street financier who left her tons of money when he died in 2022. Right? So she was a professor. She worked with kids with disabilities. Her husband died. He was a Wall Street financier, had a big chunk of change, and so she's donating it to make sure that you kind of no more tuition at this school, right? So Dr. Oni Blackstock, a physician and founder of Health Justice, said on social media that hoping there's a positive impact on the health of Bronxites, because it's up in the Bronx, home to the poorest congressional district in the United States. He also hopes this helps recruit more Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students, groups that are woefully underrepresented in medicine that do not have the same level of generation wealth as their white counterparts. Gottesman insisted that the condition of the gift was the school does not use her name, telling the New York Times, "We've already got the gosh darn name. We've got Albert Einstein." Right? Basically making it clear she's not donating this so they have the College of, medical school, College of Gottenstein. No. She's like, nope. This is Albert Einstein. We're keeping that. Right? This is the money to make sure that we've got doctors going forward that are not going to have to worry about the heavy burden of debt. And like medical school debt is no joke. We're talking $200,000, $300,000. It's amazing. That's actually, and there's more, right? But anyways, that's crazy. That was something else. Well, look, if you need more PA Progressive talk, you tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern, a YouTube channel, Twitter, or Facebook. And again, it's not just PA. It's PA-based, really, because he's not a PA show only. This is the nation's largest labor radio show, streaming show that's out there. For all the details, check out the streams. Make sure you sign up for the podcast. Go to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at the Night Caucus. That's at the Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you haven't heard, The Signal is a new podcast from the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal will shine a light on right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests to provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community toward calmer, saner, progressive roots. Check out the podcast at buckscountybeacon.podbean.com. You can also check out The Civic Circle. That's a podcast, but also by the Bucks County Beacon, that tackles politics and policy from a Gen Z lens. Sarah Zhang, Mallory Marson, Alexandra Coffey are students from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and once a month they chat about activism, advocacy, and all the political happenings affecting their generation today. Check that podcast out at civiccircle.podbean.com. And for all you gamers out there, The Game In is a Quakertown-based Black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they've got everything for retro N64s, latest consoles, video games for all platforms, and loads of collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And good grades on report cards get your kids discounts too. Got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, they've got you covered. Check them out on their Facebook page or follow them on Twitter at @thegamein, that's with 2 N's, @thegamein on Twitter. Shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And if you find yourself in the Kutztown area, not just the university, but the town, you've got to check out the Heart and Hearth Deli and Smokehouse. That's located at 466 West Main Street, kitty corner from Kutztown University's main campus. The Heart and Hearth is an American bistro featuring barbecue and French-inspired fare, all with locally sourced and organic ingredients. And if you stop by there, tell Colleen, tell Jim, the owners of the place, that Raging Chicken sent you. A special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff and follow him on his YouTube page, and follow him on Twitter at Song a Day Man. That's with 2 N's, at Song a Day Man on Twitter. And as you always hear me say, if we want a progressive future, we need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today. Become a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Just head on over to patreon.com/RCPress today. Well, welcome everybody. Good morning to you. It is the 1st of March, which is pretty incredible. 2024 seems to be flying by for me. I don't know if that's true for you too as well, but it is definitely flying by for me. Man, it's moving so quickly. Here, let's get into some of these stories here. I mean, I don't know what you say about, okay, right now the count from what I see here, right? This is the this morning's article in The Guardian. 112 dead in chaotic scenes as Israeli troops open fire near aid trucks, say Gaza officials. I don't. Let me just say, last night, as I was getting ready, for bed and stuff like that, some I'll be whatever. So the kids are in bed and getting ready to go to bed, and I'm always I have some headphones on. I'm listening to the BBC. And they're interviewing some Israeli minister, right, or functionary of the government or something like this that was on there to basically sell the war, right? But what was remarkable to me is how committed the Israeli government is to the slaughter of Palestinians, and the absolute refusal to take any accountability for the conditions in which they're producing what they're doing. I mean, so the reporter, the BBC reporter, asked this dude, say, like, look, okay, there's different stories coming out about what actually happened, how many people were killed by gunfire, how many people were killed by trucks running over them. The Israeli government saying, oh, we only killed 10. Like, okay, that means that you're basically admitting that you only killed 10. So the number's higher than that. But then there was also and then you have the Gaza officials saying that, that there's a mix of people who were killed with gunfire and people who were run over by trucks. You have eyewitnesses there that said that with kind of conflicting takes on what actually happened. Some people say the trucks began to flee to try to get out of there after a gunfire erupted, and then they tried to get out and they were, risking their own life. Others have been saying that there was people that were, swamping the aid trucks, and then the trucks were trying to leave and they ran over people there. But regardless, right, it's 112 people dead. And what this BBC reporter was asking was saying, look, you've got to at least admit that when you produce conditions of desperation by forcing, hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes and become refugees without food, without access to water, without access to adequate housing, people are going to become desperate, especially when people are starving. And, I'm saying it stronger than the BBC reporter said, but basically said, look, Israel the government can say that, okay, we're not responsible for all the deaths, that we only killed a couple dozen, right? But they're not even willing to admit that. We only killed about a dozen by firing into the crowds because they posed a threat. Starving people posed the threat. Okay, we'll put that aside. Fully armed Israeli soldiers in tanks armored were threatened by starving Palestinians. Okay? I mean, this is what we hear all the time when, kind of like you have like black men are murdered by police in this country. Well, like he had the look in his eyes, and that's enough to justify the death. I mean, it's the same racist settler logic. It's astounding. So their threat, okay. So, and then you have, this official from Israel basically saying, well, because, in the past, there's been civilian crowds and someone comes up, and they hide, and Hamas hides in the civilian crowds and places bombs on the tanks, and the tanks explode. Right? Okay. I'm sure that there's a story somewhere where that comes from. Right? We know, right, that terrorists are ultimately the cowards that use civilians to hide it, right? And they care just as little about the civilians as anyone else. They don't care if those civilians get killed. So they'll use them as shields or whatever, right? So we know that. So we can see it, okay, it may have happened in the past, that scenario just happened. But the reason why that Israeli official is saying that in this context is because they want you and me to believe that that's what was going on. That hungry, starving people are all suspect. And not only might there be a terrorist in there, but they might be in on it. And that justifies us killing those civilians, regardless of whether or not they had any ill intentions towards the Israeli soldiers, or even had posed any kind of real threat. Okay? But the Israeli government is out there saying that it shot into the air, right? It fired warning shots before it trained its weapons on the crowd. He actually said that. And what this British, this BBC reporter was basically, okay, even if we were to accept that what you just said, even if we're going to accept your narrative as plausible, the reason why you have all these starving people at 4 a.m. in the morning camping out waiting for the arrival of aid trucks is because your war has produced these starving people. You have committed, and again, they didn't say this is me, not the BBC. Israeli government and actions have committed a violence on all Palestinian people, regardless of whether or not they have sympathies for Hamas. And even if these starving people had sympathies for Hamas, that still doesn't just justify their killing. All right, again, I'm not saying that they're Hamas. They're the people they're waiting to kill these soldiers. I'm saying maybe these people are like, they're mad enough because they're starving. All their homes have been wrecked. They've been on the run for months now. Every time they're told to go to someplace new where they'll be safe, Israel then bombs the place they told them to go to, killing hundreds of more people. I mean, so that's why when we look at, when you look at what happened in Michigan, right, where you have, uncommitted. 911. Whoa. Sorry about that. That's a weird thing. You have uncommitted. Let me just get to a different version of this. Sorry. I had this. I wanted to paying attention to this. But, you know, even if you, well, I don't know what's going to, so let me just read this. This is on MSNBC, right? It's another thing. So it says, quote, the Listen to Michigan campaign had hoped to convince 10,000 Democratic voters to vote to choose uncommitted for president in Tuesday's primary election as a protest to President Joe Biden's Israel-Gaza policy. More than 100,000 people voted uncommitted. That more than 100,000 people voted uncommitted sends a blaring message to Biden that he must stop supporting Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's brutal war in Gaza. At least that's the message he wants. That's the message if he wants to convince those Michigan voters who chose uncommitted and convince disaffected Democrats in other battleground states to vote to reelect him in November. And this is kind of an important point, that it's getting completely misinterpreted in a lot of media. So this is, quote, this is not an anti-Biden campaign, unquote. Layla Alabed, a longtime Democratic activist at the head of the Listen to Michigan campaign, told CNN the day before the election. It's a humanitarian vote. It's a protest vote. It is a vote that tells Biden and his administration that we believe in saving lives, unquote. Biden won Michigan in 2020 by approximately 150,000 votes. He won 83% of the vote in the precincts with the highest concentration of Muslim and Arab Americans, and 81% of votes in Hamtramck, a Muslim majority city. Abdullah Hammoud, the mayor of Dearborn, a majority Arab American city, said in a powerful New York Times op-ed this month that he, quote, firmly believed that Joe Biden was one of the most consequential and transformative presidents that our nation has ever seen since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, unquote. But like so many other Arab and Muslim Americans, Hammoud's beliefs about Biden changed after Hamas killed approximately 1,200 Israelis during its October 7th attack and kidnapped at least 200 people. Israel responded with a military operation that has caused the death of at least 30,000 people. Thursday, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said the number of Palestinian women and children killed by the Israeli military since October 7th was over 25,000. The devastation in Gaza has mostly been caused by weapons the U.S. has supplied, and Biden has generally supported Netanyahu's prosecution of that war. After the size of uncommitted vote became known Tuesday night, leaders from Listen to Michigan and the Biden campaign appeared open to finding common ground. Abbas Alaway, a Listen to Michigan spokesperson, said, quote, our movement is actually a favor to President Biden, he said. We're telling you exactly what you need to do to win in Michigan. A senior Biden campaign advisor told Politico, quote, President Biden shares the goal of many of the folks who voted uncommitted, which is an end to the violence and a just and lasting peace. That is what he is working towards, right? So you can see the wiggle room that's going on there. This was by MSNBC columnist Dean Obeidallah. Just an excellent kind of discussion of what's actually at stake there, right? So I've seen, like, for example, in the ABC and their lead piece on this, their lead for this, their headline for this is anti-Biden uncommitted voters set to win 2 delegates in Michigan primary boosting protest, right? So they call it an anti-Biden ones, right? And that really misunderstands what the strategy here is, right? A protest vote is a way of sending a kind of a clear message in this way. Now, again, I want to make a distinction between a protest vote in a general election and a protest vote in a primary when there are no other candidates. Okay? Let's just be clear-eyed about this, right? And not say like, oh, well, you said protest vote here, but not in the general election, blah, 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 right? There are people, so for example, I just saw someone that's kind of like, yabbering online where you're saying, well, you can't be against third-party protest votes in a general election and before this one here. I mean, this is kind of like the worst kind of like rude equivalence that you can do. It's like, it's just a travesty of argumentation and kind of honesty, right? It's like the same kind of stuff. You're in a primary. There are, look, uncommitted in Michigan finished second. The only other candidate, I can't remember the guy's name who's also running the primary. He finished fourth, right? That means there were write-ins above that person. Or no, it was actually the number third was what's her face there? I'm just forgetting her name. This is horrible. But the one who won last time, the mystical one who had a decent following, but she dropped out of the race a while ago, right? So she made it on the ballot, right? But she dropped out of the race. So the guy who's actually still in the race and supposedly it didn't even finish, like finished behind a candidate who's dropped out of the race and uncommitted, right? So let's be real. So there is no real consequence to Biden's, whether or not he's going to get the Democratic Party nomination, right? That's not happening. Now, again, if this builds and this kind of gets bigger in other states with other primaries where you get an uncommitted primary, uncommitted campaigns in different states, that's going to have more of an impact for the general, but in terms of a narrative, not in terms of his actually getting the nomination, right? So now it is on the Biden campaign to actually say, okay, what are you going to do about this? They've tried their PR campaign. They've tried to kind of be wishy-washy about this. They try to kind of talk tough with one hand and do nothing with the other. And meantime, you have tens of thousands of people that are dead. Now, look, there is virtually nobody saying, right? And I say virtually nobody. Of course, there's probably some people on some extreme margin someplace that are kind of not saying this. Let's be real. There is nobody in any numbers whatsoever who is saying that, 30,000 Palestinians is bad, but 1,200 Israelis is perfectly fine. Nobody's saying that. The fact that Hamas terrorists went and slaughtered 1,200 people in Israel is a horror. But to say that because those terrorists slaughtered those Israelis, then therefore the Israeli government gets all the permission in the world to slaughter as many Palestinians as they want, that's just absurd. And that's a horror. That's any kind of legitimate argument in a society that kind of wants to even call itself a society. That's barbarism. That's blood feud stuff. And I hate to say this, but this is true, is that the consequence of what Israel is doing here is going to have long-term consequences for the safety of Jews in the world. Because once you get in a blood feud mentality, when it's all about retribution and revenge, people are no longer thinking about people as individuals, as human beings. They're thinking about them as these categories that can be eliminated. They're eliminating their humanness. You see this in all sorts of extremist movements, in demagogic movements, in terrorism, in fascism, is that you take away the specificity of people and you turn them into a category so that it's easier to eliminate them. That's what happens in blood feuds. The revenge is what matters, not the people. And if you don't think there's going to be consequences of the murder of 25,000 children and women, that's crazy. Just like Hamas, when they went and murdered 1,200 Israelis, including women and children, and committed war crime atrocities, they think that that's somehow going to bolster some kind of... This is why it doesn't even make sense. There are justifiable grievances from Palestinians about Israeli policy and how they kind of... all that kind of stuff. Putting that aside, slaughtering women and children, slaughtering civilians, You know what that's going to do? That is going to give strength to the extremist elements within Israeli culture. And they are going to respond in kind. And right now, because some of those extremist elements are dominating the Israeli government right now, guess what? Now they've got the full authority of their government to wage war in their and help in their blood feud. And now we see the consequences. But supposedly, Israel, a government, a real government, Hamas is not a real government, right? They have no autonomy over what they do. All the power, all the trade, all kind of border cross, everything like that is controlled by Israel. Access to food, access to water, I mean, all this kind of stuff. They're a quasi-administrative body. Israel is a recognized government in the world. And this is what they're carrying out. They're carrying out slaughter as a official policy. And they fully support what they're doing. And what's horrible about it, what turns my stomach about it, is that when they get asked hard questions about, just like that BBC reporter asked, don't you think that what you're doing in Gaza is creating the conditions for more atrocities like this to happen because of the desperation? They just double down. And they basically say, without saying it, yes, it's justified. Yes, we can kill as many as we can because we felt threatened. It is the same exact argument that is being that U.S. police officers use when they say, like, I saw a weird look in his eye, that's why I killed him. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible. But so, I mean, yeah. So we'll see where this uncommitted vote stuff goes, right? We'll see where this happens. And look, I'm at the point where I look at this. I mean, there's not a change in policy. That's the way I'm going to vote. That's possible. Let's not get trapped in kind of like this weird binary thinking. Right? This is another kind of trend I see in some of the kind of reporting or the discussion online. Is like when people are organizing to vote uncommitted because of a government's, like, a legitimate lack of action on part of the government or a criticism of a government, which they otherwise support. That does not mean, therefore, if you don't vote, or if you don't change your policy, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Are you kidding me? Donald Trump waged war on all these people. Donald Trump celebrated the kind of like murder of Muslims after 9/11. He started his campaign with racism. So to even use that as an argument, like somehow to say like, well, these people, what are they going to vote? Whether they vote for Donald Trump, they're going to go out and vote for Donald Trump. Really, that's so disingenuous. And that is such an erasure of the legitimate concerns of those folks. I mean, you're talking about people who showed up to vote uncommitted in Michigan's primary. They have family members, friends from these regions. They've been, I'm not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them have maybe have been to visit relatives there and now know that no longer exists. That whole town, that whole neighborhood where their family lived, where their friends lived, where acquaintances, whatever it might be, is gone. The hospitals that served it, gone. Reduced to rubble. I mean, and to like berate people who are voting uncommitted or to dismiss what they're doing as kind of whatever extreme or not even extreme, but like kind of like the margins of things that really matter, is to erase those people, those culture, and that history. Being in a democracy means contending with difficult things. And it means hearing. It means listening and understanding pain, exclusion, the experience of people who are outside the kind of official discourse. That's the history of protests. That's the history of social movements, to make those voices heard, to demand to be part of the deliberation, to be part of the democratic process, to be heard. And the fact that now you have Washington State's largest labor union, United Food and Commercial Workers, endorsing an uncommitted movement is huge. This is an NBC News. This is reported by Alex Seitwald. So let's read a little bit of this. The biggest labor union in Washington State endorsed voting uncommitted in the state's Democratic presidential primary next month, citing concerns about President Joe Biden's political strength and his support for Israel's war in Gaza. The Washington chapter of the United Food and Commercial Workers has over 50,000 members, making it the largest chapter of the union in the nation. The deeply democratic West Coast state holds its primary on March 12th. In a statement shared first with NBC News after its executive board voted on the endorsement Wednesday night, the Washington Union called Biden, quote, an ally to workers over the last 4 years, but suggested it is not confident that his ability to defeat likely GOP nominee Donald Trump in November. Quote, currently, many voters in UFCW's 3,000 executive board feel that the best path is to have the best nominee to defeat Trump is to vote uncommitted, right? Part of that, what that move is kind of to do this, has to do with recognizing exactly this resistance by lots and lots of people to those Biden's policies. And again, look, this we've known this has been a problem in Biden from the get-go. I mean, I would agree when I read earlier on some of the folks that are from the Listen to Michigan movement, like when they said that, look, Biden has been transformative as his policy agenda has been transformative as a president, and I would agree with that. You've heard me say from the beginning of this, after Biden was elected, it surprised the crap out of me about how progressive he came out with his, and how kind of carefully thought his policy goals were. I mean, it was impressive. I mean, it was horrific that the Republicans, and then including Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, basically stymied a lot of those efforts and watered them down so significantly, particularly his climate action. But it's also his infrastructure bills, also his labor action. I mean, they just kind of put a stop at that. But there are some aspects of Joe Biden, right, that are still formed in Washington, D.C., spending so much time there and being and having been convinced that there are certain things that you just don't touch, right? You just go out and you say, we support Israel and everything's good. As long as you say that, everything's fine. That's not flying anymore. The world has moved on from that notion. And people, young folks in particular, can make a distinction between Jewish people and the Israeli government. And that is exactly what Biden needs to do. Again, I go back to Naomi Klein's thing. It's like when you see this kind of conflict, right? You always got to be on the side of the children, not the guns. And that's in my view, that's Biden's frame going in. It's not about taking sides. I mean, because this is why the unconditional ceasefire, that is the way to go. Because you're taking the side of the children, not the guns. You want a ceasefire because 25,000 women and children have been killed. You want a ceasefire because I'm not sure exactly what the breakdown is there, but you have hundreds of women and children were killed in Israel by the terrorists. So unconditional. Children, not the guns. And look, this is stuff. The reason why I'm so upset about this, right, is because, I mean, one, the sheer like horror of the whole scenario. I mean, like I literally last night I was like having trouble just even getting to sleep after listening to this guy justify just the murder of starving people. I mean, it's so far beyond what I can comprehend as like what it means to be a human being in the world. I mean, give it that. But then on top of that, the failure of Democratic Party leadership, including the President of the United States, and basically being able to move beyond stale, old policy frames and to do something bold here has a risk of losing an election to a proto-fascist. And look, I want to be 100% clear about where I stand on this. It's like, there is no way that I will not vote this fall. There is also no way I will vote for any Republican candidate right now, let alone Donald Trump. And there is 100% chance that if Joe Biden is there on the ballot in the fall, I will vote for Joe Biden. But I'm not going to be out there waving the Biden flag, okay? I'm voting because the alternative is fascism. The alternative is authoritarianism. The alternative is the deepening of the destruction of any kind of semblance of a civil society we have left in this country. But I also know that because of the effed up ways that we think about voting in this country, and this goes to a lot of my brothers and sisters on the left who want to think about voting as a personal expression of themselves, and it becomes an existential crisis for them about their identity, about who to vote for, casting the vote. It's like, look, if that's your mentality, we've lost. Because building a democracy and fighting for a democracy is not the same thing as voting. Voting is only one moment. Those institutions and all that kind of stuff are moments in this bigger process. If you want to look, I feel good about voting even though I'm not happy with the choices that I have. Right? So let me be clear. When I'm cast my ballot, I still feel good, but I don't feel good because I backed a blue or a red candidate. I feel good because I participated and I voted. And I want to keep that going. I want to keep that action going. And in our system, we've got this, again, effed up two-party system that gives us limited options. And so then people, well, why don't you vote for a third party? I'll tell you why I won't vote for a third party. Right? Because there's zero chance right now that if all I do is like, presidential election comes up, let's see which third party candidate pops up this week. and I'm going to vote for them when there's no infrastructure, there's no background, there's no movement to support it. That's selfish from my perspective. I'm doing that for my feel-goods. And my anger, I get it. But I know, I know there are a few options. Like, talk about this in my class quite a bit recently, right? Because we're it's a class on rhetoric, democracy, and advocacy, and I've introduced a couple times Martin Luther King's thing about the, riot is the voice of the unheard, right? And I think that's one of the most concise and kind of poignant statements about, understanding what a riot is, right? But if you read that entire, speech that he had given talking about this, he was not a supporter of rioting, saying this is going to cause bigger fallouts than what is here. But at the same time, he's saying, I get it, I understand it. And unless you address the conditions underlying what has caused the frustration and the anger, unless there are outlets for legitimate change, riot will be a result. And, he said, I'm not going to deny the anger and the justified rage that these people have. But for a movement, we need to embrace this. He talks about nonviolence, action, all that kind of stuff. I think about, elections in the same way, right? I think about it in the same kind of framework. It's like, look, there are going to be people who are going to be so angry with Biden, that feel so left out, that feel so abused, right, by these kind of policies like in Gaza and some of the things, that feel like they're completely let down and erased, right? And some of those people, or some folks that think that Biden should be doing whatever it might be, are going to be angry enough and then are going to vote third party. Or not vote in protest. And again, depending on how many people we're talking about, that could tip the scales one way or another in a close election. Right? And again, I'm not going to look at those people and shame them. I'm not going to look at those people and say, well, you have no justified of doing that. You did. No, because I get it. I understand where it comes from. I'm not going to delegitimize those sets of feelings, right, of what it means to be in this system right now. I just have a disagreement over what's the key thing. What's the best conditions to keep on fighting? And I'm not one of these kind of accelerationists out there that think what's going to happen is that another Donald Trump term is going to come, and then people are going to be so upset that they're going to demand massive revolutionary change. You show me an example of that working, and that'd be great. I remember this debate happening around during Trump's 2016 election. All these accelerationists that were out there, like the Jimmy Dore people, all this kind of crap, they were all out there basically saying that we should go and, we should not vote. We should vote, either not vote or vote for another candidate as a protest. And, because the Democratic Party needs to learn. And then if Trump gets elected, no worries, because the people will be so upset, they'll rise up and do that stuff. That is just a fiction. That is some kind of Disney version of social movements and social change. Things do not happen by themselves. And if you're going to tell me that Trump's election was unconsequential, well, go tell that to all the women in the country who just lost their access to abortion, thanks to the 3 Supreme Court justices that he appointed. Go ahead. Go tell all the people who've had to spend the last 8 years now fighting in school boards and fighting in kind of like town councils to have to freaking go after and push back against this kind of this right-wing extremist kind of courage that are currents that have been bolstered by a president of the United States. All the anti-wokeism nonsense, all the kind of like anti-CRT nonsense, like all the kind of further push to privatize public school, all that stuff, right? So you can't tell me this is inconsequential. And no, people did not like wake up all of a sudden and kind of like, oh, I have a revolution, because it doesn't work that way. Yes, people organize by necessity, but just to hold on to scraps. That is so fundamentally different than defining a positive agenda and vision for the future. This is why I always go back to like the Green New Deal, right? The Green New Deal, that's the kind of policy and program and platform we need to have. Like one that's looking at the future, one that's saying like, we're looking at the horizon here, folks. We're not going to do like, Hillary Clinton going out and saying that, Bernie wants to give everybody a pony and everybody can't have a pony. Because that's not the way our system works. Capitalism. That's just not going to cut it. Right? Showing people your resume about how much you've accomplished within this system is not a substitute for a real programmatic vision. And I get it. Democratic Party did that for a long time. They went with the experts. Well, the experts have been as problematic as folks. So this is where we need to go. Anyways, God, I wasn't even thinking about all this stuff. Like I was like, when I start talking about it, they just get me so infuriated. But let me just say a couple things then. I mean, these are some real positive ends of stuff. I mean, what's happening in the kind of labor world right now is freaking amazing. I mean, Michelle Eisen, she's with Starbucks Workers United. She was part of the original group of organizers that organized that first store in Buffalo, that has been at the forefront of this fight kind of ever since. She's been on kind of negotiating committee and the leadership councils and all this. And now there was a joint statement that was released that says that that they're going to move towards a contract. Right, and Michelle Eisen, this is from the American Prospect. This is Harold Myerson's words. He starts off with, quote, "This is what we've always wanted," unquote, says Michelle Eisen, a Starbucks barista who's been with the company since 2010 and works at the Buffalo outlet that was the first to vote to go union back in 2021. Quote, "We wanted Starbucks to actually be the company they always said they were," unquote. She was also interviewed, as I mentioned already, on Majority Report a couple days ago. And Sam Cedar was asked him a couple questions. Say, okay, I'm a little skeptical though. Like, I mean, how do you gauge, their words, And she said, well, we said to them, right, look, there's going to be people that are skeptical, and they're, you saying that you're going to do this is just not going to be enough. So we need a show of good faith. And what was pretty amazing is that this, right? So in order to demonstrate good faith, the response is, okay, look, we're real. This is what the Starbucks folks said. We're real about this. So this is for the American Prospect again, good. To quote, "To demonstrate its good faith to understandably skeptical workers, the company also agreed to let them receive credit card tipping and also receive back pay from the raises and benefits the company had given to all its employees except those in outlets that had voted to go union." So you remember this, right? This is one of the kind of part of their anti-union campaign, is that, Starbucks, after the union movement really kicked into high gear, and suddenly Starbucks, organize, new one. Right? So what they started to do said, okay, we need to stop that. And this is a classic union busting technique, right? Is that you see that the union is gaining power. So then what you do is you give your workers, right, raises, right? Which is, again, in the hands of the right organizing committee, that they're giving you those raises, which is a demonstration that they could easily do it. They've chosen not to, right? So on the one hand, you've got the message of like, oh, look, we're giving, we care about our workers. We're giving you a 5% raise, or we're going to give you a 10% raise. And you as a Starbucks worker sitting there and like, oh, that's pretty good. And, maybe I don't want to rock the boat too much here, right? But then, get an organizing committee, like you see this enough, you just basically say, yeah, well, of course, that goes to show you, they could have given you that $10 an hour. They could have given you that, 10% increase 10 years ago. Where would you be now? Where would we be now? Instead of gating the corporate profits for their CEOs and the shareholders, if they actually kind of invested in their workers, they call us partners. Well, right? I mean, that language was already being used by organizers, right? Was already part of the other approach. There had been enough consciousness built among kind of so many folks within the movement, and then how they use like social media and blah, 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 blah. I'm getting way ahead of myself. But that point is that so two of the tactics that they used is they said, okay, well, we're going to give all our employees a decent raise, except for those who've voted to go union, right? Because, if we get a contract, then it might be different. And so they want to negotiate for their contract. So we're not going to give them raises. We're going to see how it plays out, right? So using that, but that's a threat, right? That's a threat to non-union employees that you have your raise taken away from you if you decided to go union. The other thing they did is that, for a long time, workers have been pushing to allow for credit card tips, right? So, because if you go like to Starbucks, right, you can give obviously you can give a tip on your, in cash, right, to a barista, right? Or, right, you could, apparently you could do it. I think, I don't know if it's all the stores, but on their app, they rolled it out too as well, where you can kind of give a tip on the app. But workers have been saying, look, a lot of people come and they pay with their debit cards and they want to add a tip, right? But, Starbucks didn't have that ability. They would not allow tips on credit cards for some reason. And then they decided, okay, we're going to institute that, but again, only at those stores that are non-union, right? So basically what Starbucks did is say, okay, look, yes, we recognize, who knows what they exactly, how they admitted it and all this stuff. But they said, okay, listen, in order to good faith, we're going to say, we're going to allow credit card tipping now. We're going to roll that out all stores. And all those unionized stores that did not get those raises, we are going to give them the raises and the back pay that they should have gotten, but were denied because of the anti-union campaign. That's a big deal. And Michelle Eisen, in talking with Sam Cedar, she was saying, like, look, this is where we want to be, right? And she said it, look, they've always talked about us as partners. Well, this is a way of making good on that whole notion. And she talked about her experience because she had been to She'd been to Starbucks since 2010, right? And she said, part of what drew her to want to be there, right, work at Starbucks, is that, it was the kind of company that at least voiced the kind of values that she supported, right? That they made claims about being a progressive company. And she said, and since I've been there, I've seen them make mistakes. I've seen them resist things that ran counter to that identity they claimed to do. But they eventually shift, right? They eventually kind of got it, right? I remember way back when, right? Early 2000s, when the pressure was put on Starbucks to kind of have fair trade coffee, right? Fair trade coffee, right? And, organic coffee and things like that, but fair trade in particular. And Starbucks resisted it. And there were Starbucks workers included, who were like, wait a minute. You're always talking about the value of kind of partnerships and global partnerships and treating people fairly and all this stuff. Why wouldn't Starbucks want to be a company that had fair trade coffee? I mean, that's consistent with the identity of the company. But they thought, oh, it might be increased costs and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. We're like, well, okay, wait a minute. But if you're a company that believes in these values and that's who your company is, then you do it. Right. And it took a while. Right. But then they changed. Right. I don't think all their coffee is fair trade, but like a good significant chunk. Right. Compared to what it was. Right. So, I mean, little things like that. Starbucks would say, this is something we're going to do. And then they do the wrong thing for a bit, but then there would be some pushback and then they would shift and do the right thing. She said she saw this over the years. And then she thought, that maybe this would be another one. And she said, I've been waiting for the time when they realized that they she didn't say effed up, but I'm saying effed up, that they effed up, that they screwed up. And that if they want to be the company they claim to be, then there's a different path forward. And then to turn. And this in chance they did. And I don't think it's unsurprising that a lot of the reasons why they made this shift was because Howard Schultz, their founder and CEO, kind of left. Sam Cedar was saying, one point, and I tend to agree with this position where, look, sometimes you have these people, especially successful companies. They built them, they built them and they invested all this time and everything like this, and they tend to think about them like their children, like the company, not the people, right? But they reduce their workers to like, this king, I'm the kind of genteel king that cares about his people, right? Well, meanwhile, the people are like, we don't have any food. Like, oh, you'll get some food, whatever. And he went go on these speaking tours. Every time he'd go on these speaking tours to try to convince workers to kind of be part, not to unionize, he'd make matters worse because he'd use these metaphors that were just like horrific, like about the Holocaust and stuff. And it was all about his personal feelings that somehow, I can't believe that you would feel this way about me, But they got him out of there, right? The shareholders and the leadership got him out of there. They recognized that he was causing more damage to Starbucks, right, than the workers were. Matter of fact, the workers were getting more and more support as Howard Schultz was kind of showing himself to be a schmuck. So, and here they are. So we'll see. I mean, if Starbucks gets their contract, Starbucks Workers United gets this contract with the company, that is going to be such an enormous win. Right now, because we've seen all sorts of, and right now is the time too, right? Because right now, under Biden's National Labor Relations Board, right, Biden has invested in putting some teeth into the National Labor Relations Board on the side of workers. Right. So we've seen, for example, they started actually enforcing, when, things like, when a company like Starbucks, right, gets rid of an employee for union activity, that is a violation of the National Labor Relations Act, and they are going to force the company to reinstate that person, pay back wages, and so on, and pay a fine. And for a while, they were willing to just pay the fines. Not anymore. But up until now, all those stores that voted for unionizations, they don't have contracts. That's what they're at that point of pushing for. So they have 400 stores, about 400. I think it's Michelle Eisen said it on Majority Report that they have 399, but there's going to be a 400th one that's going to be dropping within days. Starbucks has like 9,000 plus stores. If these 400 stores get contracts, you can bet, and the company is saying, we're no longer going to punish you if you want a union. That's up to you. We're not going to stand in your way, and we will negotiate with you in good faith. You watch the number of those stores that go union just skyrocket, because the fear will be gone, the intimidation will be gone. $10,000 workers will get a union contract, and tens of thousands more are lining up. Think about what that does to the labor movement. We've seen tons of labor organizing here. We've seen what happened in Amazon. We've seen what's happened in fast food. We've seen what's happened in adjunct laborers and things like this. But the thing that you always have to say is, like, again, and union organizers will tell you this: when you get the union vote, the fight starts again. Right? Because it never stopped. Because now again, for that first contract. The first contract is this really significant fight to get to the point where you actually have a contract. Starbucks Workers United appear to have crossed that threshold toward a contract. This is going to be amazing. If this sets a precedent in the industry, right, for how to treat workers, and that unions are no longer the enemy, but they are, in Starbucks language, partners. Think about what that would do. So we're going to follow. So congratulations to all those folks at Starbucks Workers United. I've been thinking about Daisy Pitkin a lot this week after hearing these announcements. Daisy Pitkin, she was, of course, on a program, and she kind of ways back when her book came out, and it's based out of Pittsburgh. And we talked a little about Starbucks during that discussion too as well. Just congratulations. I was, Ben, who did organizing work at Kutztown University, right? The whole team actually, who did the Workers United team that kind of worked on organizing fast food workers. I'm not fast food, the food service workers at Kutztown University. SCIU Workers United, just like huge like win there. But that to see this or here's bolsters the kind of work and approach they have, Workers Up. The other thing I should mention too as well, Michelle Eisen also said that one of the what has come out of some of the initial talks for how they're going to do the good negotiations, there will be that what the Workers United want is that we want actual workers on the bargaining committees, right? Not just union leadership or union lawyers making some agreement. No, we want workers there in the negotiations from day one. Huge. So congratulations. This is a big step forward. Now let's hope we get that contract ASAP. That'd be great. We also see similar situations happening. Well, other kind of organizing that's happened up there. York University in Toronto, really kind of cool to see that organizing effort going on. They are now on strike. I think the total number, I was going to say about 3,000 academic workers. York University went on strike Monday. They said the school had not met demands to address an affordability crisis, while some students worried that labor dispute would make them fall behind, as we always hear that. But striking workers at North Toronto University include contract faculty, teaching and graduate assistants, research assistants, and part-time librarians represented by the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Local 3903. I remember York University had a strike back in 2018. I worked really hard to try to get some folks on the show back then about that because it was a huge strike. It was happening in this wave of strikes, but we could never find the times that it would work. But who knows? We'll see what's going on. We'll be following that a little bit more, see if we can get some folks on, because the CUPE, Canadian Union of Public Employees, I don't know if they call it COOP or not, but they and Local 3903 has been really good about these kind of like, kind of wall-to-wall organizing, really thinking about all workers, not just kind of like say certain classes of privileged workers when organizing educational institutions. And they've been their statements and their work has been really great on that. So I'm wishing them all the luck in the world too as well. Mitch McConnell, of course, is gone. Well, not gone yet, but he's no longer to be the Republican leader after November. It's still too long as far as I'm concerned. One of the most consequential and gifted reactionaries that has occupied the Senate, and he has in no uncertain terms left his dirty fingerprints all over the degradation of American culture. So good riddance to you, Mitch McConnell. Yeah, what else do you want to say? Oh, I just, that stuff about Exxon and climate change is just that is so incredibly infuriating to me. I can't even tell you. And I was seeing this news about what's about the blizzard in California, and again, let me be clear. We know that there's been big storms, big snow, like lots of snow before me here, but this seems absolutely extreme. To have winds of right now, winds of 145 miles per hour with just huge amounts of snow, not only to kind of like mention that it is it's life-threatening, right? But it also shows that this is this is one of these consequences of climate change. I mean, this is something that, has been predicted for decades now. This is coming, right? We saw the atmospheric river in Southern California, and now we're getting basically an atmospheric river of snow. An atmospheric avalanche, if you will, is going to be dumped in the Sierra Nevada area. I don't, you see this kind of stuff, and I guess, it's like one of these things when I think about this kind of weather, I feel a bit awestruck by it. And like awestruck in the way, when you're seeing a kind of calamity. I mean, this is like nature, and the scale and scope and power. It's just kind of, I'm awestruck by it, and I don't mean like awe inspired, like wow, this is great. It's just remarkable. Like it's that that both the kind of like wonder and fear all wrapped into one, kind of seeing this kind of experience, just kind of the sheer monumental power. I mean, I know I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but it's incredible, and to see that happening. Right? You think about, I mean, just in a relatively small, well, I don't want to say small space, but in a relatively contained space. I mean, I know you're talking about like hundreds of miles and hundreds of miles apart from one another, but you think about how much moisture just got dumped on Southern California and other parts, and all the flooding that has occurred and all this stuff. And now you've got this huge, like, just monster of a storm in kind of a little bit north of where all the rain came. And then a couple states over, you've got the second biggest wildfire in U.S. history. They've been talking for a while that Texas, again, it's one of these other places. It's an arid landscape, but when you get drought and flooding and all this other kind of stuff, when you kind of intensify climate, when you intensify existing tendencies in the climate, and you get these extremes at the same time, the fact these are happening at the same time, it's like you're seeing what the future looks like. Of course, and again, we've heard wildfires are going to be more frequent and more devastating. We've been seeing that in California. And what goes through my brain is like, okay, you got this huge blizzard, you've had all these wildfires, right? And that has decimated the tree cover. So what's going to be, does that mean that we're going to have an increased number of avalanches and landslides because the tree cover has been burnt? And I recognize that the places that some of the largest fires are not exactly the places you're going to get the most snow, but you're still getting a lot of snow there, right? And you can see how this stuff snowballs, right? I mean, if you get that much snow, then you're going to have, and then say, for example, we get another heat wave that happens right in there. You get this rapid melting. Just do the math. And now in Texas, I mean, huge areas are just going to be burnt to the ground. And part of that is exacerbated by intense winds. Again, it's about again, what scientists have always said about climate change, right? Especially the last 20 years, is that it's going to intensify things, right? You put that much energy, like the evaporation, you put more warmth, right? You put more water in there, it's going to intensify weather cycles, right? It's going to intensify the power that is in the atmosphere. And this is, here we are, which is one of those things that just, when I saw that, those statements coming out from the CEO of Exxon, I just couldn't believe it. They were going to try to kind of like take every freaking penny we have and make everyone else pay the price for it, because they are going to be fine. It just kills me. Well, I know I already talked about this at the beginning of the show, but it was pretty remarkable. I think about a couple of things. So you see, I'm thinking about the Albert Einstein's College for Medicine in the Bronx, right? So you got the former professor there, 93-year-old woman that used to teach at the university, Ruth Gottesman. Ruth Gottesman, it's the largest donation ever kind of given to an educational institution in the United States. You have $1 billion. That's essentially basically say, starting in the fall, there will be no tuition for anybody. And to see this kind of like group of people, right? Students, auditorium was packed, right? And this group of students to hear this, that they were no longer going to have to incur any more tuition bills. Look at their faces, like sheer kind of disbelief. And people just being floored by it, right? Was just like, tells you how much of an impact this had. Not only that, the other aspect of this is you looked around in that room, right? When they're after the announcement, it was an incredibly diverse student body. And that for me makes this even better. Right, because we all know, like, I mean, if you're listening to this program, good chances are that there's disproportional impacts on the way that our society works, right? That there's structural racism. That, for example, that it's not the same thing for kind of like a white person with 3 generations of college education and so on to take on $200,000 debt, as opposed to a black family, right, who a person to take on that same amount of debt when they don't have the kind of legacy of family wealth, right? Just basic stuff. So this seriously has the potential of filling a huge gap, because there's also real kind of medical consequences here, right? When you're talking about say doctors in med school, is that there are worse outcomes, right, for African Americans and Hispanic kind of Americans, and other kind of, say, non-white groups, right? Precisely because the doctors don't share an experiential history of this. So we've seen, for example, there's been a long history in medical journals of basically, well, black women, they don't feel pain in the same way, right? They have a much higher threshold to pain. And every study that comes out, that's just a lie. That's just racism straightforward, right? That is kind of like, bias and racism like built into the structure of what goes on. But if that same black woman goes to a black doctor, right, or a black woman doctor, right, the chances of those assumptions being made are reduced hugely. So the fact that you have got a medical school now that is not going to saddle this whole next kind of generation of graduates with that kind of medical debt is just pretty amazing. Right. And I saw some stories. I wish I'd saved these ones, but I saw some stories right after the announcement was making, they were interviewing a bunch of the students there. And there was this one guy, I wish I saved this. It made me feel so good, because I'm like, yeah, there's a person that gets it. Right. And the reporter asked him, how you feel about this. And he's like, well, as someone who is just about to graduate med school, has paid tuition for my entire time here, and we'll start with this. I can't remember the number he said, but with like $200,000 worth of debt. He said, I couldn't be happier to know that no one else will have to do this again from this school. Is one of the most joyous days of my life. I'm like, there you go. That's a human being, right? Because we're always told that, like, everyone is going to resent everyone. They're going to, what about the divisions it's going to cause? This dude gets it. Because guess what? He cares about more than just himself. He knows the stresses that it's causing him, and he doesn't wish it upon other people. I mean, come on. Congratulations. Anyways, everybody, that's going to do it for us this week. I really appreciate you spending some time with us this Friday. It's weird. I just had these kind of flashes come up. I was about to say, like, stay safe out there in the snow, because I've been thinking so much about these blizzards coming to California. But obviously, it's cold outside here. But it's No snow is expected from what I understand. But I wish you all a kind of an absolutely fabulous weekend, and keep doing what you're doing. Some great news out there. It's been great to see finally the Hillsdale curriculum fall here at Penridge, which has been great. That is a huge victory, but there's so much more to do, so much more to accomplish, so much hope, kind of as we move forward into this election season. But I wish you for this weekend to have a good one. Friends, family, celebrations, cool stuff going around in the world. Thank you. Thanks for spending time here. This has been Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Want to remind you can help support this show by heading over to patreon.com/rcpress, where you become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Thank y'all for tuning in. Have a good one. See ya!